we will discuss about. Okay. But before that, we will start with an example problem. In thermal expansion, so in this example, what we are doing is we have a cylindrical glass container, like we were discussing last time. Similar kind of situation. A slight bit of difference is going to come in, we'll see. So we have this cylindrical glass container, okay, but it's not graduated, so there is no marking to measure volume in it. And this contains some liquid initially. So this glass cylinder has a base area, okay, of a true value of 20 centimeters square at a temperature of 15 degrees C. Okay. Now, fluid is filled, okay, at temperature of 15 degrees C up to a height measured by a true scale. So we are using, a scale like this, a separate scale to measure its height, and assume that that scale is not having any error due to thermal expansion. Okay, so we are using a scale which is properly calibrated. So up to a height of h naught equal to, say, 50.0 centimeters. Okay. Now, the temperature of the fluid plus the glass cylinder is increased to 95 degrees C. Okay. Gamma of the fluid is 3 into 10 raised power minus 4 per degree C. 3 into 10 raised power minus 5 per degree C, and gamma of glass is, let us say, 9 into 10 raised power minus 6 per degree C. Assume the scale used to measure the height of the fluid column is not heated, okay, and therefore true in its calibration. There is no error in its calibration. Okay. So calculate the measured volume of fluid using the scale. At 95 degrees C, and calculate the percentage error in the measurement. So let's begin by trying this question out, people. So try to understand here what is happening is that the glass is expanding along with the fluid, but the scale that we are using to measure the height of liquid in the glass cylinder, the height of the liquid column, that is not expanding because we've kept that at the original temperature and it's true. So therefore the error in measurement is going to come only because the base area is expanded. Okay, so let's understand it this way that let's try to figure this question out. So what is happening is at the original temperature at T naught equal to 15 degrees C, the volume of liquid in the container was the base area into the height. Okay, so the base area was 20 centimeters square and we had measured the height of the liquid column to be 50 centimeters. So that's 10 raised power 3 cubic centimeters. So that's actually exactly 1 liter. That's the true volume. Okay. Now at T equal to 95 degrees C, we are raising the temperature to 95 degrees C. The true volume of fluid. Okay. So this is also true volume of fluid, but at that temperature. Now this is also true volume, but it is at the temperature of 15 degrees C. Now this is the true volume of fluid, but at 95 degrees C. So that is going to be V naught 1 plus gamma of the fluid into delta T. So it is going to be 10 raised power 3 cc into 1 plus gamma of the fluid was 3 into 10 raised power minus 5 and into the temperature change, which is 80. So it is 10 raised power 3 into 1 plus 2.4 into 10 raised power minus 3. Okay. So it is 10 raised power 3 plus 2.4 is equal to 1002.4 cubic centimeters. This appears correct. This is the true volume. Okay. But what about the measured volume? As far as the measurement is concerned, okay, let's say the height measured is equal to h. So h into a prime should be equal to the true volume. So where a prime is the base area at T equal to 95 degrees C. So the base area at this is going to be A naught into 1 plus beta of glass into delta T. Now gamma of glass that was given to us as 9 into 10 raised power minus 6 per degree C. So beta of glass will become 6 into 10 raised power minus 6 per degree C. So this base area is going to be 20 centimeters square into 1 plus 6 into 10 raised power minus 6 into 80. This is going to be the base area. So I'm deliberately not doing this calculation fully like this. Okay. So I'm going to use this kind of values. So from this you can see, therefore the measured height is going to be the true volume divided by the true base area. So the true volume was 10 raised power 3 into 1 plus 2.4 into 10 raised power minus 3 upon the base area, which is 20 into 1 plus 4.8 into 10 raised power minus 4. So this is in cc, this is divided by centimeter square. So this height is in centimeters. So this height will become 1000 by 20 into 1 plus 2.4 into 10 raised power minus 3 into, now you can bring this to the numerator, 1 plus 4.8 into 10 raised power minus 4 to the power minus 1. Now this is where you use binomial approximation. Bring this power inside. Okay, so that is the calculation trick I taught you. So this is 50 into 1 plus 2.4 into 10 raised power minus 3 into 1 minus 4.8 into 10 raised power minus 4. Okay. And now you open this bracket. So again, this term we can neglect it because it's 10 raised power minus 7. So again, this is approximately So this is the measured height. Okay, so I'll just take you through the whole calculation once more. No, the measured height will be greater. Na? Achha, you're telling me the error, Aman? The answer you're giving me is of measured height or error or percentage error or what? I have asked you for two things. I have asked you for the measured volume at the new temperature of 95 degrees C and for the percentage error in the measurement. So I'll show you next how to calculate those things. But hope you've understood this. So the base area is expanded from E naught to E. The volume of liquid has expanded from V naught to V. Okay. And the measured height was H naught earlier, and now the measured height is H. Or we've taken this as A prime. Yeah, Snikita, I'm coming to that. So are we clear up to this calculation? H का value कैसे आ रहा है? V upon A prime. I'll show you the calculation trick, but concept wise we are clear now. How you have calculated each of these things using beta of glass, and this one using gamma of fluid. Okay, and this one is from measurement. This one concept that H into A prime should be equal to V. Good, good. Okay, so now see, I'm just using that trick of binomial approximation. Okay, 1 upon 1 plus x can always be approximated as 1 minus x if x is very small compared to 1, because 1 upon 1 plus x is equal to 1 plus x to the power minus 1. It becomes 1 minus x. So that's the trick here. And then one more term I've neglected. This term, its order of magnitude is 10 raised to minus 7. So we have neglected this term. Okay, I mean, I will verify that. Okay. So now we are getting this height, which I can calculate for you, but it's not really that necessary also to calculate. So this height will become 1.00198 into 50. So about 50.01. So 50.1. So this height will come out to be nearly 50.1 centimeters. Oh, I've got this calculation wrong, is it? Just a minute. Yeah, I've got this calculation wrong. Just small correction here. This is 19.2. Okay, so this should also be. Okay. Anyhow, it will still come out to be more or less that much only. Okay. Yeah, more or less come out to be this much, 50.1 centimeters. So now what is happening? See, the measured volume using the true scale for H but now faulty, or you can say expanded glass vessel. So if I don't take the expansion of the glass vessel into account, my measured volume will be H into A naught, because I have not measured how much the base area is. So I will just assume that it's correctly calibrated. So I will measure the volume of liquid at this temperature of 95 degrees C or whatever. I'll measure it to be the height that I measured, okay, into what I thought is the correct area. Okay. So I will measure it to be how much? I will measure it to be this much. Okay. This much. This is the measured volume. Whereas the true volume we had seen earlier, the true volume at that temperature was V naught 1 plus gamma of fluid into delta T, which we had measured to be, how much was the true volume now? It was 1 point, 1002.4 centimeter cube. Okay, so you can see that the percentage error will be low percentage. Now, even this percentage error can be done in a more short way. I'll explain how. So this is a 0.048% error. According to my calculation, it's coming out to be this much percentage error. Okay. Now this percentage error, I'll tell you an easier method of calculating it. Okay. This percentage error also, I'll tell you an easier way of calculating it. You don't need to do this calculation actually. So you understood why V prime comes slightly less than V, na? Because the base of the vessel has expanded. So the measured volume using that base, that container, will be slightly less than the actual volume because the container is expanded in base area. So it's not an accurate measurement, and the accuracy is going on the negative side. The volume is appearing to be less than the true volume because the container's base area is expanded. See, Nikita, one thing, na, percentage error we don't put with sign. Na. Matlab, you must have seen an error. No? We actually write it as a modulus. Matlab, the error in a calculation is actually modulus of the measured value minus the true value. But yeah, if you're giving with algebraic sign, then it should be negative. Okay, if you give the percentage error with algebraic sign, then it should be with a negative value, so that you know that it's less than the actual value. Okay, now let me tell you the shortcut method. Shortcut for percentage error. Okay. So you can see that the true value was V naught 1 plus gamma of fluid into delta T. Okay. Whereas you can also see that H was equal to V upon A prime. Okay. Upon A naught 1 plus beta of glass into delta T. Therefore, the measured value of volume was this correct value of height multiplied with A naught. Okay, so that would have become V naught 1 plus gamma of fluid into delta T upon 1 plus beta of glass into delta T. So you can see the difference between these two is coming because of the extra term in the denominator. See the true value of volume okay, and this is the measured value of volume at 95 degrees C. So you can see why V prime is less than V. Okay, so you can see that therefore V prime is equal to V upon 1 plus beta of glass into delta T, or it is V into 1 minus beta of glass into delta T. So the error, so if you put that with the proper algebraic sign, is V into beta of glass into delta T, but with a minus sign. So therefore the percentage error is equal to so that is minus of beta of glass into delta T. So that is minus of now gamma of glass was given to us as 9 into 10 raised power minus 6 per degree C. So alpha of glass is 1/3 of this. Okay, and beta of glass is twice of alpha. So that means this becomes 6 into 10 raised power minus 6 per degree C. So this is into temperature change was 80 into 100. So you can see that this will give us 4.8, a percentage error of minus of 4.8 into 10 raised power. How much this will become? Minus 6 plus 2, so that's minus 4 minus 2. So you can see that it's minus 0.048%, which is what we had got basically. This is the value that we had got. It's almost the same. You can see about we had got this percentage error. Yeah, we got it the same. Not almost, it was the same. So all that calculation was not necessary for percentage error. You can just see that the measured value of volume is actually the true value of volume divided by this factor. So this is the important term to understand. This measured value is the true value divided by that factor because the base area is increased. So the factor is 1 plus beta of glass into delta T. So my error only is beta of glass into delta T. No? My the fractional error is beta of glass into delta T. So percentage error is that beta of glass into delta T converted into a percentage by writing it into 100. So this is the shortcut thing I was talking about. Okay. So make a quick note of this. We will discuss bimetallic strip next. Lambda नहीं है बेटा, percent है. Which one you're talking about in the end? There's just the percentage sign. So percentage error. So yes, the top, there is no lambda anywhere. Might be delta T or something. Wait, let me magnify it. This part. No, वो V है बेटा. It's all deltas. अच्छा. अच्छा, this is delta X. That was just a general description about the error in X. Generally, we write it with the mod sign, but if we want the algebraic sign, then the mod is okay. So anyway, hope this calculation is clear to all of you. If there's any doubt, please let me know. Okay, very good. So let's move on. So the last couple of things in thermal expansion. So we will look at an application of thermal expansion to construct something called a bimetallic strip. Okay. You're familiar with this. These are used to make fire alarms or temperature sensitive circuit breakers. It consists of a metallic object, which is basically two strips of metal, which are like welded together and are kind of like a straight rod, like a straight double rod at room temperature. But when the temperature increases significantly, then the shape of that double rod or that bimetallic strip will curve into a bent rod, because one of the two rods that is part of the strip, bimetallic strip or the double strip, will expand at a faster rate or by a larger value. Okay. So this is, let's say, at temperature T naught. We have two strips. The first one is metal 1, let's say. So it has coefficient of thermal expansion alpha 1. And this one is the second metal, metal 2, let's say, which has coefficient of thermal expansion, linear coefficient alpha 2. And they also have the same thickness. Okay, the same value of thickness. So if this thickness is D, then here this other one's thickness is also D. Okay. So two metallic strips of length equal to L naught and thickness equal to D at this temperature T equal to T naught are welded, or can even say they are riveted, whichever be the case, together. Okay. Now, if alpha 2, for example, is greater than alpha 1, then, or whichever, it can also be the other way around, but basically they should not be equal. Okay. Then the rod, or what we call the bimetallic strip, because it's a double metal strip, will bend at a temperature of T naught plus delta T. So now we want to calculate the angle by which it bends. At T. At a new temperature, we want to calculate what angle it will bend by. Okay. Now you can of course have a situation where the two strips are not exactly of the same thickness. They are of thicknesses D1 and D2, but we'll take the standard situation where they have the same thickness. Okay. So this is the general arrangement. Now you can visualize that if we take the situation where alpha 2 is greater than alpha 1, then how it will tend to bend. Will it tend to bend where the first rod becomes the concave side and the second rod becomes the convex side, or vice versa? If alpha 2 is greater than alpha 1, then when it bends, which of the two metal strips will be the concave side, metal 1 or metal 2? Just think about this first. So which one will be the concave side, metal 1 or metal 2? Alpha 2 is greater than alpha 1. So if alpha 2 is greater than alpha 1, then the second rod, that is the one below in my diagram, should be of longer length. Should be on the outside now. And the first rod will be on the inside. Yes, alpha 2 will bend more. So it will be on the outer side of the curve. So it will be on the convex side. And the first one will be on the concave side. Okay. So that is how it will go. So anyway, let me try and draw a diagram to illustrate that point. So at a new temperature, assuming alpha 2 is greater than alpha 1, okay, this is how the combined strip will now look, let's say. So if they bend like this such that the center of curvature of this bent rod, so it takes a shape like an arc. No? So any arc has a center of curvature. So that center of curvature is, let's say, over here. Okay. So basically, we want to find out this angle. Want to find out this angle theta. So at t equal to t naught plus delta t, the shape becomes an arc subtending theta at center of curvature C. Want me to scroll up, Vinith? Okay, we'll go back there, but finish this part. Okay, so now what is happening? I will scroll back, don't worry. Okay. Now, if we take the radius of curvature of the first rod, we R1. This is R1. And the radius of curvature of the second rod is R2. You can see R2 will be slightly greater than R1. It's like if you take the mean radius of curvature to be R. So that is where the junction of the two rods is. If you take that to be R, then we can say that R1 is R minus d by 2 and R2 is R plus d by 2. Okay, so the length of the inner rod and the length of the outer rod will become like this. N1 will be equal to R1 theta and L2 will be equal to R2 theta, and that should be equal to L naught 1 plus alpha 1 delta t, and this should be equal to L naught into 1 plus alpha 2 delta t. So from these two equations now we should be able to get theta as a function of delta t, the rise in temperature. So that's what we'll do next. Yeah, the whole system has a uniform temperature. It's like the rod was existing at a surrounding temperature of T naught before. So metals are good conductors of heat. So they take the temperature of the surrounding. Yeah, so R1 and R2 are the radius of each of the strips. Understanding, Nikita? So like this strip, like this now. So the strips, symmetry line is this one. So this radius is R1. Okay. And then along with this, you have a second strip. And that strip symmetry line is this one now. So that radius is R2. Okay. And where the interface of the two strips is, that is like the mean value of R. Understood now the difference between the three? It's like basically having a set of concentric circles now. Like this. Okay. So this kind of situation. Okay, anyhow, so I'm minimizing this a bit so you can note this down, and now you can try to develop the formula yourself from these two. You have to just manipulate these two equations in the end to find out what thing, to find out your theta as a function of the temperature change. Kevin, see what's happening now. R is the mean radius between the two rods now, and R1 is the mean radius of the first rod. You're understanding my point? So if you're looking at this very closely now, you're seeing something like this. This is your first rod. This is your second rod. Okay. So R1 is the one coming up to here, and R2 is the one coming up to here. And R was the one which is coming up to here because it's at the mean position. So this is D by 2 now, and this is D by 2. So that's why. Okay. So anyway, now these equations, you can just manipulate them this way, that R minus D by 2 theta is L naught 1 plus alpha 1 delta t, and R plus D by 2 theta is equal to L naught 1 plus alpha 2 delta t. So just subtract the two equations. Second one minus the first one. Thickness is also increasable, but the thickness will increase by a very small amount, no? Because the increase in thickness will be the original thickness into alpha into delta t. So this itself is very, very small compared to L naught. No? So the increase in thickness is negligible compared to the increase in length. So remember, in a linear object, in an object where the length is much more than the width or the thickness, we ignore the expansion of the width or the thickness. The only significant parameter geometrically that expands is the length. Similarly, if we have, a surface like a plate or a laminar surface, then we ignore the increase in its thickness. We only take the increase in its surface area. It's only when we have a three-dimensional voluminar object, like a cylinder where the radius is not very small compared to the length, or like a spherical body or a cube or something like that, then we take the volume expansion into account. Okay. So anyway, if we subtract equation 2 minus equation 1, we get rid of r, and we get d into theta is equal to this minus this. So L naught into alpha 2 minus alpha 1 delta t. So our final formula becomes the angle by which the system bends is L naught by d into alpha 2 minus alpha 1 into delta t. Now the interesting thing you can see here is that alpha 2 minus alpha 1 into delta t will be a very small parameter of the order of 10 raised by minus 7 or something like that. But L naught by d will be a large parameter because d is much smaller than L naught. So overall we'll get an angle which is not very, very small. We'll get a significant value of angle as long as delta t is significant. So L naught by d is a very large number, maybe of the order of 10 raised by 3 or 10 raised by 4. And alpha 2 minus alpha 1 is a very small number, maybe of the order of 10 raised by minus 6 or something. So their product into a significant value of delta t will give us a significant value of theta. So we'll see that the rod is bent by a sufficient amount to notice that it is bent. Whereas instead of thin strips of metal, if we had used solid blocks of metal, then this L naught by D would not have been a very large number. No? Then the angle theta would have been so small that we would have hardly noticed that it's bent. Okay, so that completes this. Next up, one small last little formula before we move on to calorimetry. So in this, we will understand the variation of density with respect to temperature. So as you know, mass of a body or an object or a material cannot change with temperature, because mass is to do with the total amount of substance and all that. So that's not changing, but the dimension of how that mass is distributed, whether it is the length dimension or the surface area or the volume, that is increasing with temperature. So naturally the density of that material will reduce. Okay. So we will look at how to calculate the variation of density with temperature. And that is very simple. It is just from the definition of density. Density is mass upon volume. So we already know how volume is changing with temperature. So we just have to invert that relation to see how density is varying with temperature. So density is equal to mass per unit volume. Okay. So at a temperature T naught, let us say the density is rho naught, okay, and the volume is B naught, okay, and the mass is M. That does not change with temperature. So rho naught is equal to M by V naught. This is at this temperature. So now at a new temperature, okay, the density, we want to calculate how much it is becoming. Okay. But we know that the volume is V naught 1 plus gamma delta T. And we know the mass is the same. So mass is not going to change with temperature. So keeping that in mind, all we have to do is now see that the new density is the same mass but divided by the new volume. So it is M divided by V naught 1 plus gamma delta T. So that means now compare this equation with the first equation. So you will get rho is equal to rho naught upon 1 plus gamma delta T, which you can write as rho naught 1 plus gamma delta T to the power minus 1. But now we can use that binomial approximation. Gamma delta T like this. So this is the variation of density with temperature. So at this new temperature of T naught plus delta T, the density would have changed to this. Okay. So just make a note of this formula. So for example, for delta T, okay, if the volume expands by, let's say, 0.5%, then what is the percentage change in density? So you'll see that this basically means that delta V by V percentage is plus 0.5%, which means that gamma delta T is 0.5 by 100 or 5 by 1000. Okay. Therefore, delta rho by rho will become minus 0.5%. Okay. Or the density will decrease by 0.5%. When the volume expands by that much. Okay, so very simple concept here. So just note this down, and with this we finish this chapter of thermal expansion. We'll be moving on to calorimetry next. So Ayush, over here we are looking at density as the empirical value of density. Okay, how you measure the density of a material is mass divided by volume, not the packing density of the molecules. That is to do with intermolecular bond length and all that. This is like, the physical property of density, not the property at the molecular level of packing density. For example, we know the density of water. One example problem of bimetallic strip is just formula based, na beta. So bimetallic strip में क्या होगा ना, the alpha 1 and alpha 2 values will be given to you. So suppose alpha 1 is whatever 3 into 10 raised power minus 6. Alpha 2 is let's say 8 into 10 raised power minus 6 per degree C. And their original lengths are let's say 2 meters, and their thicknesses are 1 millimeter each. Then you have to find the angle for increase in temperature equal to 50 degrees C, let's say. We just substitute in the formula. And the angle will be L naught upon D into alpha 2 minus alpha 1 into delta T. So very simple. So 2 upon 1 into 10 raised power minus 3 into 5 into 10 raised power minus 6 into 50. So this angle, whatever we get, this will be the angle in radians. And later an angle in radians can be converted to an angle in degrees by multiplying it by 180 by pi. Comes in degrees. So that's why basically this is mains level stuff, because it's formula based. Whereas the earlier type of questions we've discussed now, like the percentage error when we use the faulty glass container whose base area was increasing, or the other problems we did, like the height of the triangle remaining constant and all that, those are more your advanced type of questions, because there is some kind of mathematical trick or some interpretation in that. So this, as you can see, will become 10 raised power minus 5 plus 3. So 10 raised power minus 2 into 50. So that's going to be half a radian, 0.5 radians. So that's going to be so you can say it'll be some 20 something degrees. If I'm not mistaken, around 26 degrees or something like that. Okay. All right. So let's move on to the next section of heat and thermodynamics now. So this completes thermal expansion. Okay. Not a very difficult chapter at all. Once you get used to doing the calculations using binomial approximations, like I've showed you, there's nothing difficult in it. If you just do the exercise from H.C. Verma's chapter of thermal expansion or from your module, just one of the two you can do at this stage, it's enough. Either do the module or do H.C. Verma. I will tell you when we come to the main chapters of kinetic theory and first law and all that. Then there's a lot of work to do in those. Okay. But before that, there's one more small little chapter, which is very easy, which is calorimetry. So calorimetry is a chapter again where we understand the relation of heat versus temperature. Okay. So this is heat exchange versus temperature change, okay, or state change of a material. So you can see that in general, Q is directly proportional to delta T, where Q is the heat supplied to a material or a body. Okay. And delta T, that's in joules, let's say. And delta T is its temperature change. or there can be a temperature drop if instead of supplied heat, it is heat withdrawn or heat absorbed from. So if we supply heat to a body, its temperature rises. If we withdraw heat from a body or absorb heat from it, then its temperature drops. And the relation between the two is direct proportionality unless there is a state change occurring. Okay, so state change is like solid changes to liquid or liquid changes back to solid, or a state change between liquid and gas or vapor phase. Okay. So to understand this in more mathematical depth, we will just think of a situation where we are looking at the temperature change with respect to heat supplied. Or let's say we are just measuring the temperature of a material versus heat supplied. So Q is heat supplied and T is the temperature. Okay. So suppose we see that initially it is at a certain temperature T1, and to begin with it's, let's say, a solid material. Okay. So as we supply heat, its temperature will rise proportional to the amount of heat supplied. So there's direct proportionality. Okay. Till it reaches something called a particular temperature called the melting point. Okay. So this is when it is in solid phase. Once it reaches that melting point, it undergoes melting. So it changes from solid to liquid. So to do that, to change the entire material or the amount of substance of solid material that we have to completely to liquid, a certain amount of heat is required. And once it is completed the melting, if we supply further heat, then again the temperature rises. So this amount of heat that we are supplying, it is going into melting or this thing, state change from solid to liquid. And now we have liquid phase. Okay. And again the temperature rises till it reaches something called a boiling point. Now the moment it reaches boiling point, any further heat supplied starts changing the liquid to vapor state or gaseous state. And once that process is over, again the temperature rises. So at this stage there is boiling occurring, and then the gas that we get as a result of this complete state change of the material from liquid to gaseous state. So the amount of gas that we get on doing that, just a moment people, I'll reshare the file. So this is how heat versus temperature looks for materials when we subject them to experiments in which we are supplying heat and observing how their temperature is changing or how their state is changing. So this whole thing is on the basis of experimental data from various different materials. There is no theoretical derivation of why this is a linear relationship, why it's not a quadratic relation or any other type of relation. It's just based on experimental data for various different materials. So Somarup, the idea is that this graph is a two-way graph. You can go in the direction in which temperature is increasing with Q being positive, heat being supplied, or you can withdraw heat, okay, and the temperature will drop. But the relationship between temperature and Q will follow the same graph, whichever direction in which you're going. Whether you're going in the direction of temperature rise with heat supplied or in the direction of temperature dropping with heat withdrawn. It's just the nature of materials that they'll behave in the same way. Okay. So let us say, you have a certain amount of metal and it's at temperature 20 degrees C. To raise its temperature to 50, you have to supply a certain amount of heat. And as you were supplying the heat very slowly, you'd see that the relationship between the temperature and the heat supplied was linear as you raise the temperature from 20 to 50. Now you want to bring the temperature back to 20, you'll have to withdraw exactly the same amount of heat that you had supplied in the first place. So that experimental data tells us that it follows that same path, the relationship between temperature and heat, whether we are raising the temperature or we are lowering the temperature. Now the explanation of this is very simple and we'll discuss about that also. Okay, now if you think at the molecular level, the relationship between heat and kinetic energy of molecules. Okay, Ayush, that's a very complex and interesting question. So Ayush is asking that what would happen if we heat gas for infinite amount of time? So what will happen is, I mean, typically if you heat a gas beyond a certain limit, if its molecules are, polyatomic, for example, so first the molecules will disintegrate, they will ionize and all that. And then if you continue to supply heat, then, I mean, beyond a certain stage, even the atoms might disintegrate. So there'll be changes at the quantum mechanical level within the atom. Okay, but you have to understand that for the thermodynamics that we are discussing now, we are not talking about those kind of situations where we are superheating a gas or something. We are still talking about limits within which the gas's molecular structure is remaining intact. So it's not ionizing, the outermost electrons are not getting ripped out of the atom and all that. We are not talking about those kind of situations, those extreme kind of situations. Okay. So in those kind of extreme situations, what will happen to a particular gas depends a lot on its own particular chemical nature also, whether it is polyatomic, whether the intermolecular or interatomic bonds are of particular type, how strong they are, etc. The difference in electronegativity between the atoms which are forming the bonds, whether there are van der Waals forces, and a lot more complex stuff like that comes into play. So each gas's behavior in that situation where it's reaching that super high temperature and all that is a more complex study on its own. Okay. Yeah. Now coming back to this, at the molecular level, what we discussed is heat is a form of energy which is at the molecular level it is nothing but kinetic energy. Okay. So for example, when we are talking about a solid, in a solid, if you heat a solid, if you supply heat to it, then its molecules vibrate faster. So the amount of heat that you're supplying is basically the amount of increase in vibrational kinetic energy of the solid's molecules. Okay. So, and now we had seen that absolute temperature is directly proportional to the average kinetic energy of molecules. So it makes sense, no? If I'm supplying so many joules of heat, then the solids molecules are having that many extra joules of vibrational kinetic energy. So proportionate to the amount of heat supplied, the average kinetic energy of each molecule is increasing. So that's how proportional to the heat supplied, the temperature is increasing. Okay. Similarly, for a liquid, okay, or gas for that matter, what we mean by molecular kinetic energy, that is a combination of, it's a combination of rotation, translation, and vibration in certain cases also. And vibrational in certain cases, kinetic energies. Okay. So when we supply heat, the kinetic energy of the molecules, whether it is rotational kinetic energy or vibrational or translational or whatever be the case, increases by that much amount of heat. Increases by that many joules as the number of joules of heat that has been supplied. Or when we absorb heat from a material, the kinetic energy, the total kinetic energy of all its molecules put together decreases by the same amount of joules as the amount of joules of heat that we've withdrawn. So accordingly, what will happen? The average kinetic energy of a molecule will decrease or increase according to whether we are withdrawing heat or supplying heat, proportional to the amount of heat that is being exchanged. So now the temperature is nothing but a measure of the average kinetic energy of the molecules. So the temperature change should become proportional to Q. That is the explanation of why temperature and Q are proportional to each other when there is no state change involved. Now, the moment you reach a certain temperature, where what is happening is that now any extra heat supplied will result in rearrangement of the intermolecular bonds. Rather than the molecules moving about faster, the intermolecular bonds are going to get rearranged in such a way that there's going to be state change. So in the case of melting, they're going to go from very, very strong intermolecular bonds, which keeps them bound together in a lattice structure in a solid, to much, much weaker, where within a liquid they can move about in translational motion. So the heat that you are supplying in that case for the state change is going into bond breaking or rearrangement of bonds. So it does not contribute to any change in kinetic energy of the molecules. It just contributes to rearrangement of intermolecular bonds. So no change in kinetic energy means no change in temperature. Similarly, when you're going from liquid to gaseous state, you're basically just taking away the intermolecular bond energy, because in gases there is no intermolecular bond. The molecules are basically free of each other. They only interact with each other by collision. There is no intermolecular attractive bonds or attractive forces. So whatever heat you're supplying at the melting point for a liquid, that heat is contributing to completely break the intermolecular bonds so that they're free of each other and they go from liquid state to gaseous state. So when that situation is happening, the heat supplied goes into bond energy release or breaking the intermolecular bonds. It does not contribute to increasing the kinetic energy of the of the molecules. So there is no change in temperature. Yeah, so people hope that is clear. So that is why, other than when there's a state change happening, there is a proportionality relationship between temperature and heat. Because heat is nothing but kinetic energy of the molecule. So supplying heat means the kinetic energy is increasing. Withdrawing heat means the kinetic energy is decreasing. And temperature is nothing but the measure of the average kinetic energy. So accordingly, there's proportionality. But when there's state change happening, the heat supplied or the heat withdrawn contributes to change in the intermolecular bond energy. So that's why there is no change in kinetic energy of the molecules during that state change, and therefore there is no change in temperature. So during a state change, okay, yeah, that's what we call latent heat. That's correct. Okay, the exchange of heat, okay, is, you can say, it's correlated with, or you can say it's equal to the change in bond energy. Okay, that is basically the internal energy related to intermolecular bonds. Okay. And that is what we call, so that heat is called, this heat exchange is correctly called latent heat. Okay. So for example, for boiling water to water vapor, okay, the latent heat supplied, okay, that will be equal to the energy needed to completely break the intermolecular bonds in water. Okay. Because water vapor being a gas, because in water vapor the H2O molecules are completely free. Okay, there is no intermolecular attraction force. Okay, so that is the explanation. That is the theoretical explanation, that why during a state change there is no temperature change that is occurring, because the heat supplied is basically latent heat. So it is concerned with the rearrangement of intermolecular bonds, and it is not concerned with changing the value of kinetic energy of the molecules. So there is no observed change in temperature, because temperature has to do with kinetic energy of the molecules. But see, end of the day, the idea is that this is what we observe in experiment, and the theoretical thing that I'm telling you is just a way of justifying what we see in experiment. What is happening at the molecular level is often more complex because of quantum mechanical factors and all that. So this is a sort of, you can say, approximate way of explaining what is happening using very basic ideas in physics. But the important thing is this works, because whatever calculations we'll do on the basis of these observations and the laws that we develop from them, those calculations are accurate. They're accurate with respect to experiments. So that way it's fine. Okay, let's now understand. Yes, Aditya, that can happen. Gas changing to plasma state on extreme heating is another consequence of extreme heating that takes place. I mean, it will take place at some stage, but at what kind of temperature and what kind of heating will result in that, that depends on the particular gas in question. Okay, now this relationship that we had seen, that for temperature variation with heat, okay, we had seen that Q is directly proportional to delta T. So this constant of proportionality is called the heat capacity of the given material. C is called the heat capacity, okay, for a given body or material or whatever. Okay, and that heat capacity is in joules per Kelvin, okay, or joules per degree C, or calories per degree C. 1 calorie is approximately 4.2 joules, or more accurately, 4.18 joules. Okay. But further, but if the body is isotropic, that is, it has uniform physical properties, that is, it is made of the same material uniformly, like it's not some kind of mixed material, then C is equal to mass multiplied by another physical property of the material called specific heat capacity, which becomes a material property. So for a body or a material made of uniform properties, we can say that Q is equal to ms delta T, where m is its mass, total mass, and S is the specific heat capacity. Okay, so this formula therefore becomes that Q is equal to ms delta T, for Q being the heat supplied to a body which is isotropic, okay, of mass m, made of material of specific heat capacity S, and that Q heat supplied results in temperature change delta T. Okay, so the way we've defined it, it's quite self-explanatory, okay, how it works. Okay, so S is measured in joules per kilogram Kelvin. Okay, that is the SI unit. Okay. But then the common unit is, the common units are either joule per gram degree C or calories per gram degree C. Yes, SI unit of heat capacity will be joules per Kelvin. Now, you see, whatever is the value in joules per Kelvin, same will be the value in joules per degree C, because the temperature change of 1 Kelvin is the same as the temperature change of 1 degree C. So joules per gram degree C for specific heat capacity is the same thing as joules per gram Kelvin. Okay, so one most common example of these values is that specific heat capacity of water, in fact, that is how 1 calorie is defined, is 1 calorie per gram degree C, which is the same thing as 4.18 joules per gram Kelvin, which is the same thing as 4180 joules per kilogram Kelvin. Or we can write that as 4.18 kilojoule per kilogram Kelvin. Yes, I mean the standard value is because S also varies slightly with temperature. So in the proper definition of 1 calorie, it is for the specific temperature change from 14.5 to 15.5 degrees C. Nikita, that's correct. But at our level of calculation, we'll say that it remains constant. Even for example, if we are raising the temperature from 20 to 21 degrees C, we'll think of it as 1 calorie per gram degree C only. Because there's only a very small variation. Okay, now for state change, okay, we have the concept of latent heat. So we define Q as ml, where m is mass of material undergoing state change. Okay. And L is what is called latent heat for the state change. So L is measured in joules per kilogram or calories per gram or any such unit. Yeah, Among, I'll go back to that. So, for example, for melting slash fusion, the opposite of melting, we have this is called latent heat of fusion. And for boiling slash condensation, this is called latent heat of vaporization. Okay, so just as an example right now, latent heat of fusion for ice is approximately 80 calories per gram, which means to melt 1 gram of ice into water at 0 degrees C, we require 80 grams of heat. And latent heat of vaporization of steam is approximately 540 calories per gram. You don't have to memorize these values; they'll be given in the questions in exam, but these are very common values. Okay. Now we will look at a quick example. So what is happening is in uh, thermally insulated flask, okay, 20 milliliters of some fluid, okay, its S is unknown, at 10 degrees C are mixed with, okay, 1 gram of ice at 0 degrees C. Okay. All the ice melts and the final temperature of the mixture is 2 degrees C. So find S, the specific heat capacity of the unknown liquid. Yeah, so what is happening in a typical situation like this? Na? You're mixing two materials which are at different temperatures. So there's going to be heat exchange such that they will achieve a final what we call thermal equilibrium, where the whole mixture is at a common temperature. So to achieve that equilibrium, the heat lost by the fluid, because it is cooling down from what was it, 10 degrees C to 2 degrees C, it will be equal to the heat absorbed by the ice, because the ice melts to water, okay, and then heats up from 0 degrees C to 2 degrees C, okay, and it is in a heat sealed container, no? It's thermally insulated container, so there's no heat loss to the surrounding. So within that, the heat exchange has to be such that, yes, this is the zeroth law of thermodynamics, that heat lost is equal to heat gained. Actually, the statement of zeroth law, I'll tell you in the next lecture, is slightly different. It says that if one material A is in thermal equilibrium with another material B, and B is in equilibrium with C, then A must be in equilibrium with C. But the working principle of zeroth law is this only, that if we have a situation where there's heat exchange between two bodies, the heat exchange will keep occurring till they achieve thermal equilibrium. And at thermal equilibriums, their temperatures will become equal. So the heat lost by the fluid will be, oh, this is, sorry, not 20 milliliters, my mistake. This is 20 grams. Please make a correction here. Okay. So 20 grams into that unknown temperature, I mean, unknown specific heat capacity, into the temperature drop, which is 10 minus 2. This should be equal to the heat absorbed by the ice. So that is mass of ice 1 gram multiplied by the latent heat of ice plus mass of the water formed into specific heat capacity of water into the temperature change, which is 2. Okay, this is basically ml plus ms delta T. Now, latent heat of ice, I'm going to use that standard value, 80 calories per gram. And specific heat capacity of water, I'll use this standard value, 1 calorie per gram degree C. Okay, Snikita, very good. That's correct. Close to 0.55, I think that's what you people are getting. Yes. So 20 into 8 into S will be equal to 80 plus 2. Okay. So this side, it's in calories, and this is gram degree C. Okay. So I'll get S in calories per gram degree C. So I don't need to convert units and all that. I can just leave it this way. So yeah, how much you're getting? 0.512. Is it? Yeah, correct. 0.512 calories per gram degree C. So this is a typical type of question in calorimetry. All that definition of specific heat capacity, latent heat, etc., is to be able to execute these type of questions where we are applying this principle, which is basically a consequence of zeroth law of thermodynamics. The exact statement of zeroth law is somewhat different, but when we apply it in numerical situation, it becomes this only, that within a thermally insulated environment, if there's heat exchange happening between one thing and another thing, then the heat lost by one must be equal to the heat gained by the other. Okay. So with this, we conclude today's lecture, people. Next up, we will look at some example problems in calorimetry again, which will just take a few minutes. But next lecture is going to be very important because we are going to move on to kinetic theory of gases, and from there, the first law of thermodynamics. So kinetic theory of gases plus first law of thermodynamics. So this is where the main chunk of questions is going to be for your JEE mains and advanced level papers. Okay. You can say about 70% of the questions coming, 70 to 75% of questions coming from heat and thermodynamics are going to be based on these two concepts, kinetic theory and first law. So this will take a few lectures. They are not such small chapters like calorimetry and thermal expansion. Okay. So next couple of weeks, 3 weeks or so, we will be concentrating on this kinetic theory of gases and first law. So that's it for today, people. Wish you all the best. Yeah, bye, people. Wish you all the best.